Well, first, obviously, I'd like to thank the Academy. But I really owe my success as an award-winning automotive journalist to being objective. I think one of the key differentiators between me and other journalists is that I'm not married to one particular brand. And furthermore, objectivity, and thus my authority, comes from loving all cars equally. Right! I mean, anyone who owns a car that they're purporting to review, at the end of the day, they're just completely full of shit. Like all iconic nameplates, each new generation of GTI isn't just judged by its badge or against the Golf that came before it. Instead, it's often judged against a romanticized notion about what the nameplate means. And so, as a journalist, the first thing I have to do is to disclose and then ignore the fact that I've bought 2 Mk7 Volkswagens new. And then I bought one for my mom. And then I helped 28 of my friends buy Golfs, e-Golfs, GTIs, Jettas, and All-Tracks. But whatever, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about what makes a GTI, any GTI, so special. A GTI is literally nothing more than a fast Golf. A Golf is literally nothing more than a German economy hatchback. What's made the GTI so special in every generation since 1975, some better than others, is that it combines sports car speed and fun with an interior far bigger and far more usable than any sports car. Almost as important, GTIs have always been classless. You're just as likely to see one parked on the side of the road in a gritty neighborhood as you are in the garage of a multi-million-dollar mansion. They're unpretentious, they're unassuming, and for an enthusiast who has to choose one car, there really is no better option. A GTI does more things better than any other car. Starting with the Mark IV and under the tutelage of Ferdinand Piëch, the same man responsible for the Bugatti Veyron, the GTI moved seriously upmarket. The whole industry laughed when Dr. Piëch said the Mark IV Golf would be better than a Mercedes. But Dr. Piëch had the last laugh. By the way, Mercedes delayed the W205 C-Class by an entire year because, as one engineer confessed to me, they couldn't come close to the Golf's interior quality, its overall NVH, or its ride. That Golf was the Mark 7, and it was the world's best $50,000 car. It just happened to come standard with a 50% off coupon. And the GTI version? Well, it was so grown up that it wasn't quite as fun as its predecessors, but there was no better sporty car to live with every day. And that brings us to the new Mark 8. And the first thing you notice, of course, is its styling. Or rather, how much styling there is. Please reserve your judgment on this car until you see it in an urban setting, because it actually looks pretty good in a city. And that may be due in part to this new King's Red paint, which hides this weird eyeliner. Does anyone know why this is here? Can anyone tell me what this does? Is it? Underneath, this is mostly the same car as before. Volkswagen's development budget wasn't big, just 1.8 billion euro, and much of that was spent on ways to reduce cost and build complexity. The engine is the 4th generation of the EA888 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder, which was a clean sheet design that debuted halfway through the Mark V. You can actually see the cost cutting when you open this engine compartment. There's no VW logo on the engine cover, and that's a cost savings. Then Volkswagen can use that same cover on a Volkswagen, an Audi, a Porsche, a Seat, a Skoda. And they didn't even bother putting a hard plastic glossy cover on it. It's just a sound insulator. And the EA888 is still a cast iron block. And though that seems ghetto, it's actually not, at least where noise, vibration, and harshness are concerned. VW could save a couple of pounds by switching to aluminum, but then would have to put that weight back in sound deadening. This may be one of the last cast iron 4-cylinders around, but it's actually a good thing. Indeed, this one is even more refined than the last 888, and that's a hell of an accomplishment. Remember, that engine was so refined that VW had to put a vibrator on the firewall, which it called a sound actor, just so you could hear the thing. The only time you ever heard or felt the old engine was under 2,000 RPM when it had a little bit of a diesel-like harshness. That is now gone.
And the Mk8 is fast as hell. This one is a Euro spec early production car, and it's a little laggier than the old engine. The US GTI is rated at the same 241 horsepower, but don't be surprised if it's a little bit slower than the Euro car, because US engines are typically tuned a little bit less aggressively because our fuel is, for lack of a better word, crap. The Mk8 has the same computer-controlled locking differential and transmissions, a 7-speed DSG or this 6-speed manual. And while you can turn off stability control on this Euro car, the computer will shut it all down if it feels axle hop or too much wheel spin. This is very much unlike the DSG car, which has programming to help put the power down without slowing you down. As far as suspension tuning is concerned, well, it's a little early to tell because this is a European spec car with dynamic chassis control and aggressive tires, and often ours are tuned very differently. Volkswagen says, however, they've completely eliminated understeer. And I'm sorry, that's just not the case. You might have read elsewhere that this car is now assy and playful at the rear. But that's because, for whatever reason, Volkswagen put really aggressive rubber on the front of the test cars, but not on the back. If you have an evenly matched set of tires on this car, it's a resolute understeerer. I know, I spent 2 full days on a racetrack and went through an entire set of tires. You can watch that video here. But more importantly, not once did I ever have to add any opposite lock. I'm not saying you can't get the GTI sideways, but I am saying it may take a set of cafeteria trays to do it. Anyway, if the Mk8 sounds a lot like the Mk7, that's because it is. At least until you get to the interior. The cost cutting makes itself known here. Whereas the last GTI had an interior that matched cars twice its price, this one is fine. There's lots of hard plastic. And the black and red plaid seats, which were such a cool defining feature of the last few generations, are now more gray than black, and even before they get filthy, look cheap. They're still epically supportive and comfortable though, a GTI trademark since the Mark II.
So too was the golf ball shifter, which has now been replaced by something that no longer comfortably fits a human hand. And the entire user interface is brand new. And that's where the problem begins. Volkswagen has gotten rid of every single physical button, apparently completely unaware that every car company that's done this has had to put them back in for the next generation.
Capacitive buttons, while all the rage these days, because they look modern and are cheap to produce, suck. You can't feel them because they're just a flat piece of plastic, and so they use little vibrators to give you haptic feedback once you've hit a button. The problem is that you can't tell where the button is until you've hit the button.
And so the heated steering wheel control, which protrudes further towards you than any other control on the wheel, is constantly and accidentally activated while you're driving. And then it conveniently brings up a climate control menu where you can't control the heated steering wheel. So the only way to turn it off is to press it 3 more times. But you can't feel the haptic bzzzt while you're driving. So you have to look down for the control and then press it 3 more times, going from high to medium to low to off, looking for a tiny little display. And then when you're done, unclick the climate control menu that you didn't ask for in the first place.
This is made even worse because the 5 or so button presses you need to access this stuff is each met with a second or 3 of latency. That's once the system is fully booted. On a cold start first thing in the morning, the whole thing takes so long to boot that for the first 10 or 15 or 30 seconds of driving, you can do nothing. Which means if you left the AC blowing ice cold at you yesterday in the hot sun, you can't stop it from trying to freeze you to death the next morning. Worse still, the controls you use the most often, temperature and audio volume, aren't illuminated at all.
Think about this for a second. Some brainiac at Volkswagen decided you should be able to choose between 16 billion different interior illumination colors. And they put puddle lights in the mirror that project a complicated pattern onto the puddle, so complex you would never be able to see the puddle in the first place. And then put 10 fog lights on the front of this car, but didn't bother to illuminate the controls you use the most often.
That person obviously didn't watch what happened to Honda. Honda got crucified in customer satisfaction surveys for getting rid of its rotary volume control, and after a couple years finally conceded that was a huge mistake. Honda is not alone. In fact, for half a decade now, infotainment systems account for more problems than any other category, according to J.D. Power. And it's not that they're just difficult to get used to, as car companies often fire back at us. Quoting J.D. Power again, 3 years later, customers are still frustrated with them.
Worse yet, the single most hated safety feature, and the one that real-world buyers turn off immediately, is lane keeping assistant. And guess what? The GTI turns its on every single time you start it. So every time you drive this car, you have to press this button, click OK, press the button again, lest it swerve all over the road every time it sees a tar strip. I was tempted to leave it on and let it swerve itself into a fire hydrant just out of spite. Unfortunately, though, while it has wireless charging, the wireless charging tray has a cover over it that blocks GPS signal. So it would have fired the airbags and called 911 and sent the ambulance, quarter mile in that direction.
If it seems like I've spent too much time on this, I haven't. User interface, or UX, is now the key differentiator between cars. Used to be you bought one car over another because of ride or handling or engine refinement or efficiency. All that stuff has been evened out. Everything's the same these days.
10 years ago, people were trading in their cars left and right just to get Bluetooth, and then it was nav and CarPlay. But I'm not talking about that. These days, every one of a car's functions, including HVAC and lighting, is integrated into its infotainment UX. And this UX is so bad that it makes you ask, did anyone bother testing this in the real world?
And this is where the fanboy knife cuts both ways. My favorite thing about the last GTI is that every part of the car, from the styling to the interior layout to the dash to the powertrain to everything, was gimmick-free. Form always followed function.
For the Mark 8, well, that changed. The clean design, gone. The simple UX, gone. The packaging is there and it still hauls ass. The fundamentals of that GTI are just as good as every GTI before it. But unlike every previous GTI, that is irritating to interact with.
Any incremental gains in performance have been offset by small setbacks in quality and a big swing and miss on the UX.
On the whole, the Mark 8 is still a GTI, but I would choose the last one. And so would every Mark 7 owner that I put in this car. Then again, what would we know? We're just a bunch of fanboys. Okay, so you're just gonna keep the Ferrari framed out the entire time, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Action.
I'm not some rich YouTuber asking you to like and subscribe. Hey, up, keep the Ferrari out. I'm an automotive journalist asking you to like and subscribe. And that's because that's how YouTube works. If you don't click those buttons, YouTube doesn't know you liked what you've just seen and isn't gonna show you any more of it. And if you don't like what you've just seen, well, join the club. And by that, I mean the Hagerty Drivers Club, which gets you access to this award-winning magazine, as well as discounts on amazing stuff. And if you still don't like what you've seen, well, then just leave a nasty comment because that's how the internet works. I need to go clean that up.